The science vessel. Harmonious Dawn drifted quietly through space, its sensors focused on the strange energy readings coming from the dark nebula ahead. Lead researcher Thyron checked his instruments for the third time that hour. Something was not right about this region of space. Theron belonged to the Valix species, a peaceful race that had spent centuries exploring the galaxy through science rather than conquest. His people believed that knowledge and understanding could solve any problem. Violence was something they had left behind long ago, a relic of their primitive past. The ship carried 42 crew members, all scientists and support staff. They had no weapons. The Valix saw no need for them. In all their travels across the stars, they had never encountered a situation that could not be resolved through calm discussion and mutual respect. That belief was about to be tested in the worst possible way. The first alarm came from the sensor station. Junior technician Verath called out in confusion. 3 large ships had just appeared on their screens, coming out of faster-than-light travel directly ahead of them. The vessels were massive, covered in dark metal plating that absorbed light rather than reflected it. Thyron felt his chest tighten. He recognized those ship designs from intelligence briefings. Kresh warships, raiders, slavers, monsters who treated other living beings as products to harvest and sell. He moved quickly to the communications panel. Perhaps this was a misunderstanding. Perhaps the Kresh ships were simply passing through. He opened a channel and spoke in the standard galactic language, keeping his voice calm and friendly. The response came immediately. A harsh, growling voice filled the bridge. The face on the screen was nightmare made flesh. The Kresh commander had 4 eyes, all of them fixed on Thyron with predatory focus. Sharp teeth filled a mouth that split the alien's face almost in half. The Kresh spoke in broken but understandable galactic standard. His message was simple and terrifying. The Valix ship was now Kresh property. The crew would be processed. Resistance would be punished. Cooperation might result in quick deaths instead of slow ones. Theran tried to negotiate. He explained that they were scientists, not soldiers. They had nothing of value except their research data. They posed no threat to anyone. Surely there was some way to resolve this peacefully. The Kresh commander laughed. It was a sound that made every Valix on the bridge freeze in primal fear. Then the transmission ended. 3 seconds later, the Harmonious Dawn shuddered as weapons fire struck their engines. The lights flickered. Alarms began screaming throughout the ship. The chief engineer reported catastrophic damage. They had lost all main power. Emergency systems were barely holding. Thyron watched in horror as the Kresh warships moved closer. He could see their docking ports opening. They were preparing to board. He turned to Verath at the communications station. The young technician was trembling, his large eyes wide with fear. Thyron forced himself to speak calmly. Send a distress signal, broadcast on all frequencies. The Galactic Coalition had to know what was happening here. Verath's hands shook as he worked the controls. The distress beacon went active, screaming into the void. But even as it transmitted, they all knew the truth. The nearest Coalition military base was 6 days away. The Kresh would have them processed and gone long before help could arrive. The boarding began 20 minutes later. The Kresh came through the airlocks in their combat armor, carrying weapons that looked more like butcher's tools than military equipment. They moved through the ship with brutal efficiency, gathering the Valix crew and herding them toward the cargo holds. Thyron tried to keep his people calm. He told them to cooperate, to not resist. Perhaps if they showed no threat, the Kresh would treat them with some measure of mercy. Deep in his hearts, he knew this was foolish hope. The Kresh were not known for mercy. In the cargo hold, the crew was forced to kneel in rows. Young and old, researchers and technicians, they all huddled together in fear. Some were crying. Others had gone silent with shock. A few whispered prayers to gods that seemed very far away. The Kresh commander walked among them, examining his new property. He spoke to his subordinates in their harsh language, gesturing at various Velix crew members. They were being sorted, categorized, assigned values based on age, health, and species traits. Thyron felt rage building inside him, a feeling his people had supposedly evolved beyond. These creatures treated sentient beings like livestock. They felt no shame, no guilt, no hesitation in their cruelty. One of the younger crew members, barely into adulthood, tried to run. The Kresh response was immediate and savage. A weapon discharged. The young Velix fell and did not move again. The commander looked at the others and spoke in broken galactic standard again. This was the price of resistance. The next one would die slower. Hours passed like years. The Kresh had brought the Velix ship alongside their harvesting vessel. Through the ports, Thyron could see the interior of the Kresh ship. It was a factory, a processing center for living beings. He saw holding cells packed with prisoners from species he did not recognize. He saw machines whose purpose he refused to imagine. But then something unexpected happened. A Kresh technician noticed that the distress beacon was still transmitting. The commander ordered it shut down, but the technician reported that it could not be turned off remotely. Someone would have to go to the communications station and disable it manually. The commander seemed unconcerned. Let it broadcast. No one would arrive in time to matter. The Kresh had perfected the art of quick harvesting operations. In 12 hours, they would be gone, and this ship would be an empty hull floating in space. What the Kresh did not know was that the distress signal had already been received, not by the distant coalition military base, but by something much closer, a small patrol vessel that happened to be only 14 hours away at maximum speed. The UHSF Ranger was on routine patrol near the border of charted space when Communications Officer Katie Williams picked up the distress call. She listened to the message, her face growing pale. Then she called for the captain. Jake Morrison arrived on the bridge within seconds. He was a tall man with gray starting to show in his dark hair. He had served in Earth's Space Forces for 20 years, and he had seen many things in that time. But the fear in Williams' voice told him this was something different. He listened to the distress call. He heard Thyron's desperate plea for help. He heard the sounds in the background, the harsh Kresh voices, the crying of the Velix crew. He heard the moment when the young Velix was killed, the sound cutting through the transmission like a knife. Morrison's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the edge of the command chair. Around him, his bridge crew waited in tense silence. They all knew what was coming. They all knew the regulations. Human ships were supposed to report such situations to Coalition Command and wait for orders. But Morrison had not joined Earth's Space Forces to follow regulations when people were dying. He had joined because someone needed to stand between the innocent and the monsters that hunted them. He turned to his pilot. Set course for the Velix ship. Maximum burn. He did not care how much fuel it took. They were going to get there in time. The Ranger dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. The bridge crew had been at battle stations for the past 2 hours, running final checks on every system. Now they could see their target on the screens ahead. Jake Morrison stood at the center of the bridge, studying the tactical display. 3 Kresh warships surrounded the Velix science vessel. The readings showed the Velix ship was badly damaged, barely holding together. Debris floated in space around it. Pieces of hull and equipment scattered by weapons fire. Lieutenant Brandon Cole sat at the tactical station, his fingers moving across the controls. The young officer had graduated at the top of his class from Earth's Naval Academy. He spoke without looking away from his screens. The Kresh were transferring prisoners to their main harvesting ship. Life pods from the Velix vessel had been destroyed. They wanted no witnesses and no escapes. Lisa Hayes reviewed the sensor data at her station. Her expression was grim. The Kresh warships were each twice the size of the Ranger. They carried heavy weapons designed to break through military-grade shields. The Ranger was built for patrol work and fast response, not fleet combat. In a straight fight, the odds were heavily against them. Morrison called for a meeting in the ready room. His senior officers gathered quickly: Hayes, Cole, Chief Engineer Kyle Patterson, Medical Officer Emma Sullivan, and Marine Commander Ryan Foster. They had 5 minutes to plan an attack against a superior force. Patterson spoke first. The engineer was a practical man who believed in facing problems head-on. Their weapons were at 60% capacity after a recent skirmish with pirates. Their shields were in good shape, but they would not hold long against concentrated fire from 3 warships. He could give them maybe 10 minutes of full combat operations before systems started failing. Emma Sullivan reported that her medical bay was ready for casualties. She had prepared for the worst. She did not say it, but everyone in the room knew what she meant. She expected heavy losses. Ryan Foster outlined his plan for a boarding action. If they could get his Marines onto the Velix ship, they could secure the prisoners while the Ranger engaged the Kresh warships. But it was dangerous. His team would be exposed during the approach. If the Ranger fell, his Marines would be stranded. Cole brought up tactical projections on the screen. He had been analyzing Kresh battle tactics during the journey. The Raiders were ambush fighters. They overwhelmed weaker prey through superior numbers and firepower. But they had never faced human combat doctrine. They fought like the predators they were, aggressive but predictable. Morrison listened to it all. Then he made his decision. They would hit the Kresh hard and fast. Cole would target their weapons systems, crippling their ability to fight back. Foster would take his Marines in during the confusion. The Ranger would keep all 3 Kresh ships focused on it while the rescue operation proceeded. Hayes pointed out the obvious. This plan required the Ranger to survive against 3 warships while protecting both the boarding shuttle and the damaged Velix vessel. Morrison met her eyes. He knew. But it was the only way to save those people. The meeting ended. Officers returned to their stations. Morrison settled into the command chair and opened a channel to the Kresh vessels. His message was broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that the Velix prisoners would hear it too. He identified himself as Captain Jake Morrison of the United Human Space Forces. He stated that the Kresh had violated Coalition space and attacked a peaceful science vessel. He demanded they release all prisoners immediately and surrender for trial under Coalition law. They had 1 minute to comply. The response came quickly. The Kresh commander appeared on screen, his 4 eyes gleaming with amusement. He had heard of humans, the new species that thought themselves warriors. They came from a heavy-gravity world and believed this made them special. But the Kresh had been raiding the galaxy for centuries. They knew real power when they saw it. The Kresh commander looked at the single human patrol ship on his sensors. He laughed. 1 small vessel against 3 warships. The humans were either brave or stupid. Either way, they would die screaming. Morrison's expression did not change. His voice remained calm and cold. He thanked the Kresh for making their choice clear. Then he gave a single order to his crew. "Weapons free. Show them what humans can do." The Ranger surged forward at a speed that shocked the Kresh crews. Human ships could pull maneuvers that would crush most species under the gravitational forces. The patrol vessel dove straight toward the Kresh formation, rolling and weaving through incoming fire. Cole had already locked onto his first targets. The Ranger's weapons opened up with precision that seemed impossible at such range. Energy beams struck the lead Kresh warship's weapon ports, destroying 3 gun batteries in the first salvo. The Kresh ship tried to rotate, bringing undamaged weapons to bear, but Cole had already anticipated the move. His next shots took out their targeting sensors. The Kresh commander was yelling orders now, the amusement gone from his voice. His ships were scrambling to respond to an attack style they had never encountered. The humans fought with mathematical precision, every shot calculated to cause maximum damage to combat capability while conserving power. Hayes was routing ship power with incredible efficiency. She shifted energy from non-essential systems to shields just before impacts, then immediately redirected it to weapons for return fire. The ship's computer could not have done it better. But Hayes was not relying on computer calculations alone. She was reading the battle, feeling the rhythm of combat, anticipating needs before they arose. Patterson was in engineering, watching his power systems spike beyond rated capacity. He made adjustments on the fly, bypassing safety limiters and redirecting coolant flow. The engines were running 15% over normal maximum. Any other engineer would have refused to push the system so hard. But Patterson understood something important. It did not matter if the engines burned out after the battle as long as they lasted through it. The second Kresh warship tried to flank the Ranger, using its superior mass to force the human ship into a crossfire. Cole saw it coming. He put 3 shots into their forward shield generator, creating a weak point. Then he told Morrison where to turn. The Ranger spun on its axis, a maneuver that generated 7 gravities of force. On the Kresh ships, such a turn would have injured or killed the crew. But humans evolved on a heavy gravity world. 7 Gs was brutal, but survivable. The Ranger completed the turn and fired through the weak point in the Kresh shields. The shot penetrated deep into the warship's hull, destroying their main reactor. The second Kresh ship went dark, drifting in space with no power. 1 down, 2 to go. But the Ranger had not escaped unharmed. The third Kresh warship, the commander's vessel, had landed several hits. Alarms were blaring on multiple decks. Hayes reported hull breaches on decks 5 and 6. Emergency force fields were holding, but they were losing atmosphere in 3 compartments. Sullivan was already moving with her medical teams. Injured crew members were being pulled from damaged sections and rushed to the medical bay. She worked with swift efficiency, triaging patients and directing her staff. People were hurt, but no one was dead yet. She intended to keep it that way. While the Ranger continued its assault, Ryan Foster was executing his part of the plan. His assault shuttle had launched during the initial attack, using the chaos of battle as cover. Now it was approaching the Velic science vessel from an unexpected angle. Foster had 30 Marines with him, all in full combat armor. They were not going to use the docking ports. The Kresh would be watching those. Instead, Foster's team was going to breach through the damaged hull section where the Kresh had originally boarded. The shuttle matched velocity with the tumbling Velic's ship. Foster gave the order. His Marines activated their magnetic boots and jumped across the gap between vessels, carrying breach charges and weapons. They moved with the confidence of warriors who had trained in zero gravity until it was as natural as walking. The charges detonated, creating an opening large enough for the Marines to enter. They poured into the Velic's ship, weapons ready. Foster took point, his armor sensors scanning for hostile contacts. The Kresh had left guards, but they were concentrated near the cargo holds where the prisoners were being kept. Foster's team moved through the ship in 2-man units, clearing each corridor with military precision. They communicated through hand signals and brief radio calls, coordinating their movements like parts of a single organism. This was what they had trained for. This was what humans did better than any other species in the galaxy. They were persistence hunters, evolved to work in groups and chase down prey until it had nowhere left to run. The first contact came near the ship's main corridor. 3 Kresh guards spotted the Marines and opened fire. The human armor absorbed the hits. Foster's team returned fire with controlled bursts. 2 Kresh went down immediately. The third tried to fall back but ran into another Marine unit approaching from the opposite direction. Trapped between 2 forces, the Kresh guard surrendered. Above them, the space battle continued. The Ranger had disabled the first Kresh warship and was hammering the second. The Kresh commander was beginning to realize his mistake. These humans did not fight like any prey species he had encountered. They fought like apex predators defending their territory. Worse, they fought with honor and discipline. Every shot was calculated. Every move had purpose. There was no panic, No hesitation, no fear. The Kresh commander made a decision. He opened communications with his remaining operational warship. They would focus all fire on the human vessel and destroy it. Then they could deal with the Marine boarding party at their leisure. He gave the order to concentrate fire. But Cole had been waiting for this. The moment both Kresh ships committed to a full barrage, he had Morrison execute a maneuver that should have been impossible. The Ranger dove under the incoming fire, rolled 90 degrees, and came up behind the damaged warship they had hit earlier. They used the drifting Kresh vessel as a shield. The Kresh shots meant for the Ranger struck their own ship instead. The disabled warship took massive damage, breaking apart under the barrage. The Kresh commander screamed in rage. Morrison's voice was still calm when he spoke. He told Cole to target the third warship's engines. It was time to end this. The Ranger came around the debris field and fired every weapon it had. The concentrated barrage struck the third Kresh warship's engine section. Explosions rippled through the enemy vessel. It began to list, losing power and maneuverability. Inside the Velik's ship, Foster and his team reached the cargo hold. The Kresh guards there were preparing to execute the prisoners rather than let them be rescued. Foster did not hesitate. His team breached the cargo hold doors and engaged the guards in close combat. It was brutal and quick. The Kresh were strong and vicious, but the human Marines had something the raiders lacked. They were fighting to protect innocents, not to harvest them. Every Marine in that cargo hold was driven by a righteous fury that gave them strength beyond their training. Within 2 minutes, every Kresh guard was down. Foster moved among the Velik's prisoners, his armor's external speakers broadcasting in Galactic Standard. He told them they were safe. Help had arrived. The humans were here, and they were taking everyone home. Around him, 42 Velik's crew members began to weep with relief, some of them reaching out to touch the human Marines as if they could not believe they were real. The Kresh commander Vaktar sat in his damaged ship and tried to understand what had just happened. In 300 raids across 50 star systems, he had never been defeated. The Kresh took what they wanted. Weaker species ran or died. That was the natural order of things. But these humans had changed everything in less than 30 minutes. One patrol vessel had disabled 3 warships. Their tactics made no sense. They flew maneuvers that should have killed their own crew. They targeted with precision that required computational power the Kresh could not match. They coordinated attacks across multiple vectors simultaneously. It was as if every human on that ship shared a single mind. Vaktar accessed his database on Earth species. The information was limited. Humans had joined the Galactic Coalition only 8 years ago. They came from a heavy-gravity world where life was a constant struggle. They had evolved as persistence hunters, creatures that chased prey across vast distances until exhaustion killed it. They had fought wars among themselves for thousands of years before achieving space travel. The database noted that other species found humans disturbing. They carried themselves like predators, even in peaceful settings. They showed teeth when they were happy, a gesture most species associated with aggression. They formed social bonds with other predator species and kept them as companions in their homes. They consumed chemical compounds that would be toxic to most galactic species, calling them food and drink. Most troubling was a note about human combat psychology. Humans did not have an automatic submission response when facing superior force. Where other species would recognize a hopeless situation and surrender to preserve their lives, humans would often fight harder. They had a concept they called spite, where they would accept their own destruction if it meant also destroying their enemy. Coalition psychologists found this behavior irrational and dangerous. Vaktar understood now. He had not been fighting rational prey. He had engaged apex predators from a death world, warriors who had evolved to never stop fighting, and he had lost. His communications system crackled to life. The human captain was hailing him again. Vaktar considered ignoring it, But what was the point? His weapons were gone. His engines were destroyed. He was drifting in space, completely at the mercy of these Deathworlders. He accepted the transmission. Jake Morrison's face appeared on the screen. The human captain looked tired but satisfied. He spoke in clear galactic standard, his tone professional. He informed Vaktar that the Valix prisoners had been secured. All Kresh personnel on the science vessel were now in custody. The 3 Kresh warships were disabled but intact. Coalition forces were being called in to take possession of the vessels and arrest all crew members. Vaktar felt rage building. He bared his teeth, all 4 rows of them. He told the human that the Kresh would return. They would hunt down the Ranger and everyone aboard it. They would make examples of the human crew that would be remembered across the galaxy. No one interfered with Kresh operations. No one. Morrison's expression did not change. He replied calmly. The Kresh were welcome to try. But they should understand something first. Humans protected those who could not protect themselves. It was a fundamental part of who they were. Any Kresh ship that attacked civilians would find human ships waiting for them. And next time, the humans might not be so concerned with taking prisoners alive. The transmission ended. Vaktar sat in darkness, his ship's emergency power barely keeping life support running. Around him, his crew waited in sullen silence. They had been defeated by creatures they had thought were weak newcomers to the galactic stage. The shame of it burned worse than any physical injury. On the Ranger, the mood was entirely different. The crew was exhausted but triumphant. They had fought against superior numbers and won. More importantly, they had saved lives. The Valix refugees were being treated in the medical bay and temporary quarters throughout the ship. Emma Sullivan moved among the Valix crew members, checking them for injuries and trauma. Most had superficial wounds from their rough handling by the Kresh. A few showed signs of severe psychological shock. All of them were malnourished and dehydrated. The Kresh had not bothered to properly care for their captives. Sullivan worked with calm efficiency, treating wounds and administering medications. She spoke softly to each patient, explaining what she was doing in simple galactic standard. Many of the Valix had never encountered humans before. They found the human doctor strange to look at, with her forward-facing eyes and showing of teeth when she smiled. But her gentle manner and obvious care put them at ease. Thyron, the Valix researcher who had sent the distress call, was one of the less injured. He followed Sullivan around the medical bay, watching her work with fascination. He asked her questions about human medicine, about Earth, about why the Ranger had come to help them. Sullivan answered while she worked. She explained that humans believed in helping those in need. It was not complicated. When you heard someone calling for help, you went to help them. That was basic decency, not heroism. But Thyron could not accept this simple explanation. He had studied the tactical data from the battle. The Ranger had been outnumbered 3-1. The crew had risked their lives against overwhelming odds for strangers they had never met. This went beyond basic decency. This was something else, something the Valix had lost long ago in their evolution toward pure rationality. He asked Sullivan about fear. Did humans not feel it? How could the crew function in combat when they knew they might die? Sullivan considered the question carefully before answering. Of course humans felt fear. Fear was a survival mechanism, a warning system that helped keep them alive. But humans had learned long ago that some things were worth being afraid for. Protecting innocent lives was one of those things. On the bridge, Morrison was dealing with a different kind of problem. The coalition military had finally responded to his earlier messages. Admiral Keth of the coalition fleet was on the screen, and he was not happy. The Dravik admiral's scaled face showed clear displeasure. His voice carried the weight of authority and irritation. Keth demanded to know what Morrison thought he was doing. The human captain had engaged in military action outside his patrol zone without authorization. He had attacked Kresh vessels, potentially creating a diplomatic incident. The Kresh had allies and trading partners throughout certain sectors. This action could have political consequences that a mere patrol captain could not understand. Morrison listened patiently. When Keth finished, the human captain responded. He asked if the admiral had listened to the full distress call. Keth admitted he had reviewed it briefly. Morrison suggested he listen again, particularly to the sounds in the background, the screams, the pleas for mercy, the sound of a young Valix being executed simply for trying to escape. Morrison continued, his voice hardening. He explained that human military doctrine was clear. When faced with civilians under attack by hostile forces, you responded immediately. You did not wait for authorization. You did not calculate political consequences. You saved lives first and dealt with paperwork later. If the admiral wanted to discipline him for that, he would accept whatever punishment came. But he would do the exact same thing again tomorrow if another distress call came through. Keth was silent for a long moment. Then he asked to speak with Lisa Hayes privately. Morrison nodded to his second officer and stepped away from the screen. Hayes took his place, wondering what the admiral wanted. Keth's tone was different when he spoke to Hayes. Less formal, more weary. He told her that he understood what Morrison had done and why. The admiral had been a young officer once. He remembered what it was like to believe that doing the right thing mattered more than following procedure. But he also understood politics. This situation was going to create problems at levels far above a patrol ship captain. Hayes asked what the admiral wanted from them. Keth explained that the coalition needed time to manage the political fallout. In the meantime, he needed the Ranger to secure the Kresh vessels and all prisoners. Full documentation would be required. Every action, every shot fired, every decision made needed to be logged and justified. The coalition might need to put Morrison on trial to appease certain political factions. Hayes felt anger rising but kept her voice controlled. She asked if the coalition would really punish an officer for saving lives. Keth's response was blunt. Politics did not care about right or wrong. Politics cared about maintaining stability. The Ranger had disrupted that stability no matter how justified the reasons. The conversation ended with Keth ordering them to remain in position until coalition forces arrived. The Ranger was effectively under investigation. Hayes returned to Morrison and relayed the conversation. The captain took the news calmly. He had expected something like this. But Katie Williams at the communications station had made an interesting discovery. While securing the Kresh vessels, Ryan Foster's Marines had accessed the ship's computer systems. They had found something important. Williams showed Morrison the data on her screen. The Kresh warships contained detailed files on other operations, coordinates for 6 more harvesting missions, target lists of colonies throughout Coalition space, supply routes, safe havens. But most damning were the communications logs showing contacts with certain Coalition bureaucrats. Officials who had been feeding information to the Kresh in exchange for a percentage of the profits. Morrison studied the data carefully. This changed everything. The Kresh had not been operating in isolation. They had support from within the Coalition itself. That was why they had been so successful for so long. Someone had been protecting them. He called his senior officers together again. This time the meeting included Thyron. The Velix researcher had recovered enough to participate. Morrison showed them all the data and asked for their analysis. Brandon Cole was the first to speak. The targeting information was detailed and recent. The Kresh had been planning their next 6 raids with precision, knowing exactly when each target would be most vulnerable. Someone with access to high-level Coalition intelligence was feeding them information. Kyle Patterson examined the supply routes. The Kresh had safe stations throughout supposedly secure space. They had been operating under Coalition noses for years. This level of infiltration suggested corruption at multiple levels. Thyron looked at the communication logs with growing horror. He recognized some of the names. Coalition officials he had met at scientific conferences. People he had trusted. They had been selling out entire colonies to these monsters for profit. Ryan Foster pointed out the tactical implications. If they released this information publicly, it would cause chaos in the coalition government. Multiple officials would be arrested. Political alliances would collapse. But if they kept it secret, the creche would continue operating with impunity. Morrison made his decision. They would turn over all the data to Admiral Keth, but with a condition. The coalition had to act on this information. They had to shut down every creche operation identified in these files, and they had to do it quickly, before the creche realized their data had been compromised. He sent the data to Keth with a detailed message. He explained what they had found and what needed to happen next. He made it clear that if the coalition chose to ignore this information for political reasons, he would release it publicly. The people of the galaxy had a right to know that their own Government Fleet Admiral Nathan Brooks arrived in the system 4 days later with a battle group that made every species in the sector take notice. The carrier UHSF Sentinel led the formation, flanked by 6 destroyers and 3 support cruisers. It was a statement of intent. Earth was not asking permission anymore. They were claiming their place as a power in galactic affairs. Brooks himself was a man who commanded respect without needing to demand it. He was in his 60s, with white hair and a weathered face that showed the experience of 40 years in military service. He had fought in Earth's final global conflicts before humanity achieved unity. He had commanded the first human warships to venture beyond the solar system, and he had negotiated Earth's entry into the Galactic Coalition with patient determination. Now he sat across from Jake Morrison in the Ranger's ready room, listening to a detailed report of everything that had happened. Brooks did not interrupt. He simply listened, his expression neutral. When Morrison finished, Brooks was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked a single question. Did Morrison regret his actions? The younger captain did not hesitate. No. He would do it again without changing anything. Those Valix crew members were alive because his crew had acted. That was all that mattered. Brooks nodded slowly. He told Morrison that he had made the right call tactically and morally, but he had also created a political nightmare. Half the Coalition Council wanted to give Morrison a medal. The other half wanted to put him on trial for exceeding his authority. Earth's diplomatic corps was scrambling to manage the fallout. Morrison started to apologize, but Brooks held up a hand. He was not criticizing. He was explaining reality. The galaxy ran on rules and procedures because that was how diverse species learned to coexist. Humans had a tendency to ignore those rules when they conflicted with what seemed obviously right. That made other species nervous. But Brooks had reviewed the data from the creche ships, the corruption, the planned raids, the evidence of coalition officials betraying their own people. This changed the political calculation entirely. Morrison had not just saved one ship. He had exposed a criminal network that had been operating for decades. The Admiral explained his plan. The Coalition High Council was meeting in emergency session to address the scandal. Brooks himself would be presenting the evidence to them. But he needed Morrison and his crew there as witnesses. The Ranger would accompany the battle group to Coalition headquarters. They would tell their story publicly, and Earth would formally propose a solution to the creche problem. Morrison asked what kind of solution. Brooks smiled, and there was something dangerous in that expression. Humans would lead a task force to hunt down every creche operation identified in the stolen data. They would do it quickly and efficiently, and they would do it under coalition authority, making it clear that this was not human imperialism but galactic justice being served. The journey to coalition headquarters took 2 weeks at standard cruise speed. During that time, the human battle group became a traveling showcase of Earth's military capabilities. Ships from other coalition species came to observe, their crews curious about these Deathworlders who had defeated the creche so decisively. Lisa Hayes found herself giving tours to visiting officers, explaining human technology and tactics. She noticed a pattern in their questions. They wanted to know how humans trained for combat, how they managed the psychological stress, how they maintained discipline under fire. The answers often surprised them. Human training focused heavily on teamwork and rapid decision-making. Soldiers trained in small units until they could predict each other's actions. They practiced scenarios that went wrong, learning to adapt when plans failed. They pushed physical limits not to create super soldiers, but to build confidence that they could keep functioning even when exhausted and afraid. The psychological component was even more interesting to the visiting officers. Humans did not suppress fear or aggression. They acknowledged those emotions and learned to channel them productively. A human Marine going into combat was allowed to be scared, but they also knew their squad mates were depending on them. That social bond, that refusal to let down the team, was often stronger than fear. Brandon Cole gave tactical demonstrations to coalition military observers. He showed them how human targeting computers integrated with neural interfaces, allowing gunners to process targeting solutions at speeds that seemed impossible. But the real secret was not the technology. It was the training. Human gunners trained for thousands of hours until the calculations became instinctive. The computer assisted, but the human made the final decision on every shot. Ryan Foster's Marines became something of a curiosity. Other species' ground forces came to watch them train, and what they saw shocked them. The humans trained at intensity levels that would hospitalize most species. They wore weighted armor and ran obstacle courses. They practiced hand-to-hand combat that looked brutal and violent. They trained in chemical-laden environments that simulated toxic atmospheres. But Foster explained it simply. Humans trained harder than they would ever fight. That way, actual combat felt easier by comparison. The mind adapted, the body adapted. When the real situation came, it was just another day at work. Marines did not have time to panic because they had done everything 1,000 times before in training. The Velix crew members were still aboard the Ranger, recovering from their ordeal. Thyron spent much of his time observing the humans, making notes for a research paper he was planning. He was particularly fascinated by how humans integrated social bonds into their military structure. He interviewed Emma Sullivan about human medical practices. She explained that human military medicine focused on rapid stabilization and return to duty. Wounded soldiers were treated and sent back to their units as quickly as safely possible because humans fought better when they were with their regular teams. The social cohesion was as important as the physical treatment. Thyron also spoke with Katie Williams about communications and coordination. She showed him how human ships maintained constant communication streams between all stations. Every officer knew what every other station was doing in real time. This created a shared awareness that allowed for incredibly fast coordination. When Cole called for a maneuver, Morrison could authorize it instantly because he already understood the tactical situation. But what really intrigued Thyron was the human concept of initiative. Lower-ranking humans were encouraged to make independent decisions within their areas of expertise. They did not wait for orders if the situation was clear. This distributed decision-making meant human ships could react to changing situations faster than vessels where every decision flowed up and down a rigid command chain. Kyle Patterson tried to explain it during one of Theron's interviews. In human military culture, the mission objective was more important than the specific plan. If the plan stopped working, you adapted. Every human on the ship understood the overall goal. They were empowered to figure out how to achieve it using their particular skills and knowledge. This created redundancy. If one approach failed, 10 others were already being attempted. The Galactic Coalition headquarters was located on a massive space station orbiting a neutral world. The station housed the council chambers, diplomatic quarters, military command centers, and administrative offices for dozens of species. It was the political heart of an alliance that spanned thousands of inhabited systems. The human battle group's arrival caused significant attention. Earth was still a relatively new member of the coalition. Most species knew little about humans beyond basic facts. They were from a heavy gravity world. They were omnivorous predators. They had fought devastating wars among themselves before achieving unity. They were considered dangerous but potentially useful. Now, a human battle group was here, bringing evidence of corruption at the highest levels of coalition government. And the humans were demanding action. Admiral Brooks met with the Coalition High Council in closed session. He presented the data recovered from the Kresh ships, communications logs, financial records, lists of officials who had been paid to look the other way while the Kresh harvested entire colonies. It was damning evidence that could not be ignored. The council erupted in arguments. Some members demanded immediate investigation and arrests. Others urged caution, warning that moving too quickly could destabilize the government. A few openly questioned whether the human evidence was reliable or if it had been fabricated to increase Earth's influence. Brooks let them argue for an hour. Then he played the distress call from the Valix ship. He played the sounds of people begging for help, the screams of those being sorted like livestock, the execution of a young crew member who tried to escape. He played all of it, forcing the council to hear what their corruption had enabled. The chamber fell silent. Admiral Keth, who had been sitting quietly throughout the session, finally spoke. He confirmed that coalition intelligence had verified the authenticity of the data. The corruption was real. The Kresh operations were real. And if the council did not act, more people would die while politicians debated. A Valix council member asked the obvious question: what did the humans want? Brooks stood and addressed the council directly. Earth wanted to lead a task force to shut down every Kresh operation identified in the stolen data. They wanted full coalition authority and cooperation from member species. They wanted this to be done quickly, before the Kresh could adapt or be warned by their corrupt contacts, and they wanted it understood that humanity would not tolerate such atrocities being ignored for political convenience. The boldness of the request shocked many council members. Humans had been in the coalition for only 8 years. Now they wanted to lead major military operations. Some saw it as human ambition. Others saw it as Earth trying to establish itself as a power in galactic affairs. But a growing number saw something else. They saw a species that was willing to act when others hesitated. They saw warriors who fought to protect the weak rather than exploit them. They saw the possibility of finally dealing with the Kresh problem that had plagued the galaxy for generations. The council debated for 3 days. During that time, Morrison and his crew gave testimony to various committees. They described the battle, the rescue, what they had found on the Kresh ships. Thyran and the other Valix survivors also testified, describing their capture and the horror of knowing they were about to be processed like animals. Public opinion across the coalition began to shift. News services were covering the story extensively. Images of the Rangers' battle against 3 Kresh warships were broadcast widely. The sight of human Marines rescuing the Valix crew became iconic. Support for the human proposal grew among ordinary citizens, even if their governments were hesitant. On the 4th day, the council reached a decision. They would authorize the creation of a coalition rapid response task force with Fleet Admiral Brooks in overall command. The task force would have authority to respond to distress calls anywhere in coalition space and to engage in military operations against piracy and slavery. While the initial focus would be the Kresh operations identified in the recovered data, the task force would become a permanent entity. But there were conditions. The task force must include ships and personnel from multiple species. Humans could not act unilaterally. All operations must be documented and reported to the Council, and if the task force exceeded its authority or violated coalition law, it would be disbanded immediately. Brooks accepted the terms. He knew this was as much as Earth could reasonably expect. The coalition was giving humans a chance to prove they could lead military operations responsibly. It was an opportunity and a test. Morrison received orders to remain with the task force as one of its primary field commanders. The Ranger would be joined by ships from 6 other coalition species. They would form the rapid strike element, moving quickly to hit crash operations before they could relocate. As Morrison prepared to leave Coalition headquarters, Thyron approached him one final time. The Velix researcher had something he wanted to say. He thanked Morrison and his crew for saving them. But more than that, he thanked them for showing the galaxy that some things were worth fighting for. The Coalition Rapid Response Task Force struck its first target 12 hours after leaving headquarters. A Kresh supply depot hidden in an asteroid field, servicing their harvesting operations across 3 sectors. The attack was swift and overwhelming. The Ranger led a strike group of 4 ships, approaching the asteroid field from an unexpected vector. Brandon Cole had analyzed the Kresh defensive patterns and found their weakness. They always assumed attacks would come from the primary shipping lanes. They never expected an assault from the galactic south, where the asteroid field was thickest and most difficult to navigate. Jake Morrison brought his ship through the asteroids at a speed that horrified the Coalition captains following him. The Ranger wove between massive rocks, using them as cover and occasionally nudging smaller ones into different trajectories to confuse the Kresh sensors. It was piloting that bordered on reckless, but Morrison trusted his crew completely. The Kresh barely had time to react before the strike group emerged from the asteroid field directly above their depot. The human ships opened fire first, targeting the depot's defensive platforms with precision. Within minutes, the Kresh supply station was defenseless. Morrison offered them a chance to surrender. They took it. The second operation was more complex. A Kresh harvesting ship was in the process of raiding a small colony on a border world. The local defense force was outgunned and losing badly. The task force arrived to find the colony's orbital platforms destroyed and Kresh ground forces already on the planet's surface. Ryan Foster took 3 companies of Marines down in assault shuttles. They were joined by ground forces from the Dravik and Borean species, both of whom wanted to see how humans fought in planetary operations. What they witnessed became the stuff of military legend. Human Marines did not fight like other species. They used the environment as a weapon. They employed combined arms tactics, coordinating infantry, armor, and air support in fluid patterns. They adapted constantly to changing conditions, and they pushed forward with a relentless momentum that the Kresh could not match. Foster's tactical doctrine was simple: hit hard, move fast, never give the enemy time to regroup. His Marines struck the Kresh positions with overwhelming force, then immediately moved to the next target. They did not waste time securing areas that were already cleared. They kept the pressure on until the Kresh broke and ran. The Dravik commander, a veteran of a dozen campaigns, watched the human assault with professional appreciation. He noted how the Marines used terrain that other species would have considered impassable. They climbed vertical surfaces using powered armor. They moved through toxic gas clouds with environmental seals. They crossed rivers that would have stopped most ground vehicles. The humans treated obstacles as opportunities rather than barriers. Within 6 hours, the Kresh ground forces were defeated, the colony was liberated, and 300 prisoners who had been awaiting transport to Kresh processing centers were freed. The colonists celebrated, but Foster was already loading his Marines back onto shuttles. There were 5 more operations to complete. They did not have time for celebrations. Over the following weeks, the task force hit every Kresh operation identified in the stolen data. Supply depots, harvesting stations, hidden bases, safe havens. Each operation was planned with precision and executed with speed. The Kresh never had time to adapt or relocate. The humans came like a storm, fast and devastating. Emma Sullivan and her medical teams treated not only task force casualties, but also thousands of rescued prisoners. She coordinated with medical personnel from other coalition species, sharing human techniques and learning from their expertise. The medical bay on the Ranger became a center for treating the physical and psychological trauma the Kresh inflicted on their victims. Sullivan discovered that human approaches to trauma care were different from most species. Humans believed in talking about traumatic experiences, processing them emotionally. Many other species tried to suppress or forget trauma. Sullivan found that a combination of approaches worked best. Let patients process grief and fear, but also give them practical tools to manage those feelings. Kyle Patterson and his engineering team were working miracles to keep the Ranger operational. They were running more missions than any ship was designed to handle. Equipment was breaking down from overuse. Power systems were strained. Patterson and his people worked around the clock, repairing, modifying, and occasionally inventing solutions to problems that should not have been solvable in the field. The other Coalition engineers watched in amazement. Human engineering philosophy was different from theirs. Most species designed systems to operate within specific parameters and no further. Humans designed systems with the assumption that they would be pushed past rated capacity in emergencies. Patterson pushed everything to the limit and sometimes beyond, finding capabilities in the ship's systems that the original designers never intended. Katie Williams coordinated communications across the task force, managing data flows between ships of different species with different communication protocols. She became known for her ability to cut through confusion and deliver clear information when it mattered most. During one particularly chaotic operation, she kept 6 ships coordinated through a communications disruption that should have made coordination impossible. She did it by predicting what each ship would need to know and pre-positioning information packets throughout the network. The 4th operation brought them face-to-face with Vaktar again. The Kresh commander had escaped Coalition custody during a prisoner transfer. He had returned to his people and now commanded the largest remaining Kresh harvesting facility, a massive station deep in uncharted space. Fleet Admiral Brooks made the decision to hit the station personally. He brought the full battle group, including the carrier Sentinel. This would not be a quick raid. This would be a siege, a statement that the Kresh era was ending. The battle for the harvesting station lasted 3 days. The Kresh fought desperately, knowing that defeat meant facing justice for decades of atrocities. They threw everything they had at the Coalition forces. Their warships attacked in waves. Their defense platforms fired until their power cells burned out. Their ground forces fought to the last warrior rather than surrender, but the humans and their Coalition allies were relentless. They pushed forward despite casualties. They adapted to every defensive tactic the Kresh employed, and they never stopped coming. On the 3rd day, Foster led the final assault on the station's command center. His Marines had fought through kilometers of corridors, facing Kresh warriors who knew they had nothing left to lose. Foster himself had taken wounds that would have killed most humans, but combat stimulants and sheer determination kept him moving. The command center was Vaktar's final redoubt. He waited there with his most loyal warriors, determined to kill as many humans as possible before the end. When Foster's team breached the doors, the fighting was brutal and close range. Foster faced Vaktar directly. The Kresh commander was larger and physically stronger. He had 4 arms to Foster's 2. He was fresh while Foster was exhausted and injured. By any logical calculation, Vaktar should have won that fight, but humans did not fight based on logic alone. Foster fought with the memory of every victim he had seen in Kresh holding cells. He fought with the knowledge that his Marines were depending on him. He fought with the accumulated rage of watching the strong prey on the weak throughout this campaign. And he fought with the simple, stubborn refusal to quit that defined his species. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes. Foster took a blade wound that carved through his armor and into his side. But he got inside Vaktar's guard and brought the Kresh commander down with a combination of strikes that would be analyzed in military academies for years to come. As Vaktar lay defeated, Foster stood over him. The Marine commander was bleeding badly and swaying on his feet, but he spoke clearly. He told Vaktar that this was the price of preying on the innocent. The Kresh had ruled through fear for too long. That era was over. Humanity and the Coalition would hunt down every creche operation. Every criminal would face justice. The galaxy would know peace from their terror. Vaktar looked up at the human standing over him. He saw the blood running down Foster's armor. He saw the exhaustion in the Marine's stance, but he also saw something that chilled him to his core. Foster was smiling, not with joy, but with satisfaction. The human was hurt and tired, but he had won, and he knew it. The creche commander realized in that moment what made humans so dangerous. They enjoyed the challenge. They thrived on overcoming impossible odds. They were happiest when fighting for something they believed in. This was not duty or orders driving them. This was purpose, and you could not defeat an enemy fighting with purpose. The station fell 30 minutes later. Coalition forces secured the facility and began processing the creche prisoners. But what they found in the holding cells made even hardened warriors stop and stare in horror. 4,000 prisoners from dozens of species packed into cells designed for a fraction of that number. Some had been there for months awaiting processing. All showed signs of severe abuse and neglect. Emma Sullivan arrived with a medical flotilla, ships from 6 species working together to treat the rescued prisoners. The scope of the medical response was unprecedented. It took days just to assess everyone's condition and begin treatment. Some prisoners required immediate surgery. Others needed psychological intervention to prevent complete mental collapse. Thyron, who had joined the task force as a civilian advisor, moved among the rescued prisoners. He spoke with beings from species he had never encountered, hearing their stories of capture and terror. He recorded it all, determined that the galaxy would know the full scope of what the creche had done. One of the prisoners was a young Borean female who had been captured 6 months earlier. She had watched her entire colony harvested, her family processed. She should have been broken by the experience. But when the human Marines came through the doors, she had found hope again. She told Thyron that the humans reminded her that the universe still had protectors, not just predators. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Ranger, looking at the tactical display showing the captured station. This was the last major creche facility they had identified. There would be more operations to come, hunting down the scattered remnants. But the backbone of the creche harvesting network was broken. Lisa Hayes approached him with a report. Casualties from the 3-day battle were significant, but not catastrophic. The Ranger had taken damage, but nothing Patterson could not fix. More importantly, they had rescued 4,000 prisoners and captured or eliminated the majority of the creche military leadership. Morrison felt the weight of those numbers. 4,000 lives saved. But the cost had been real. Good people had died in this operation. Coalition soldiers, human Marines, ship crews. They had paid in blood for this victory. Brooks contacted Morrison from the Sentinel. The Admiral wanted to commend the Ranger's crew for their performance throughout the campaign, but he also had news. The Coalition Council had made a decision based on the success of the operations. The Rapid Response Task Force would become a permanent institution, and Morrison was being promoted to command his own squadron within it. Morrison accepted the promotion, but made a request. He wanted the Ranger to remain his flagship. The ship had proven itself. More importantly, his crew knew how to work together. That cohesion was worth more than any new ship, no matter how advanced. Brooks agreed. The Ranger would receive extensive repairs and upgrades, but Morrison would keep his command. Earth was proud of what their people had accomplished. They had shown the galaxy that humans could be trusted with military power because they used it to protect rather than conquer. The ceremony at Coalition headquarters 3 weeks later was attended by representatives from dozens of species. The task force received formal recognition for their actions. Individual commendations were given to Morrison, Foster, Hayes, Cole, Patterson, Sullivan, Williams, and dozens of others who had distinguished themselves. But the moment that mattered most came when survivors of the Kresh operations were invited to speak. They came from many species, many worlds. They spoke in different languages, but they all said the same thing. They thanked the humans and their allies for not ignoring their suffering. They thanked them for caring when others did not. They thanked them for proving that mercy and strength could exist together. One elderly Velix, a survivor from Thyron's original ship, spoke last. He said that his people had evolved beyond violence, believing it was primitive and unnecessary. But they had been wrong. Violence was a tool, neutral in itself. What mattered was why you used it. The humans used violence to protect. That made all the difference. Morrison stood to accept the recognition on behalf of his crew. His speech was short. He said that humans had learned through painful history that evil thrived when good people did nothing. They had learned that sometimes the only way to protect the innocent was to stand between them and those who meant harm. They had learned that peace was not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. He finished by saying that the task force would continue its mission. Anywhere in Coalition space, if someone called for help, they would respond. Pirates, slavers, raiders, anyone who preyed on the weak would find the task force waiting, because that was what humanity offered the galaxy, not conquest, not domination, protection. The final scene showed the Ranger departing on a new patrol, its hull repaired and systems upgraded. The crew was at their stations, ready for whatever came next. They had proven themselves against one of the galaxy's most feared threats, but they were not resting on that victory. Morrison sat in his command chair and looked at the stars ahead. Out there, somewhere, someone might be in trouble. Someone might be calling for help. And if that call came, the Ranger would answer, because humans had made a promise to the galaxy. We hear your distress calls. We will come. We will fight for you. The Kresh had learned that lesson the hard way. They had begged for rescue from the storm they had unleashed. The Deathworlders' fleet had delivered judgment instead, and the galaxy was safer for it. Other species watched the humans with a mixture of respect and caution. These Deathworlders were dangerous, no question. They had weapons and warriors that could defeat most threats. But they had also shown honor, mercy, and commitment to protecting those who could not protect themselves. The Coalition had gained more than a military asset. They had gained guardians, beings who ran toward danger when others fled, soldiers who fought harder when defending others than when defending themselves. Warriors who understood that true strength lay not in conquest, but in protection. In the vast darkness of space, the Ranger continued its patrol. Behind it, other ships of the task force spread throughout Coalition territory, each one ready to respond at a moment's notice. The age of predators operating with impunity was ending. The age of protectors had begun. And at the center of it all were humans, the Deathworlders from Earth. They carried their violent nature not as a curse, but as a responsibility. They were dangerous because they had to be. Someone needed to stand between the innocent and the monsters. Humans had volunteered for that duty, the galaxy had called for rescue, the Deathworlders had answered, and judgment had been delivered to those who thought the strong could prey on the weak without consequence. It was a lesson the Kresh would never forget, and it was a promise the galaxy would come to depend on. In the command chair of the Ranger, Jake Morrison watched the stars pass by. His crew worked around him, professionals doing their duty. They did not think of themselves as heroes. They were just people doing what needed to be done. But to thousands of beings across the galaxy, to the rescued prisoners and the protected colonies, they were exactly what heroes looked like. Not perfect, not invincible, but present, willing, ready to fight when fighting was necessary. Ready to show mercy when mercy was deserved. The distress call had been answered, the judgment had been delivered, and the watch continued, endless as the stars themselves. Velix had evolved beyond violence, But they had also lost something important along the way. They had forgotten that sometimes peace must be defended with force. Morrison told Thyron that humans had learned that lesson the hard way through thousands of years of war. They knew the cost of violence. They knew the pain it caused. But they also knew that refusing to fight could sometimes cause even more suffering. The key was to fight for the right reasons, to protect rather than to conquer. Thyron said he would be writing a paper about humans and their philosophy of defensive aggression. He believed other species needed to understand what drove these Deathworlders. They were not mindlessly violent, they were consciously protective. There was a difference, and it mattered. As the ranger prepared to depart with the task force, Morrison stood on the bridge and looked at the stars ahead. They were about to begin the largest anti-piracy operation in Coalition history. The Kresh had preyed on the weak for decades. That was about to end. Humanity and its allies were coming, and they carried a simple message. Predators had ruled the darkness for too long. It was time for the protectors to take their place. Nanti had been complicit in these atrocities. Keth's response came 3 hours later. The Admiral's face on the screen showed a mixture of shock and grim determination. He had reviewed the data. He had confirmed some of the communications with Coalition intelligence services. This was worse than anyone had suspected. The corruption went deeper than Keth had imagined. He told Morrison that he was taking the data directly to the Coalition High Council. This could not be buried. Too many lives were at stake. But Keth also told Morrison to prepare for consequences. By exposing this, the humans were making powerful enemies. Some Coalition members would see this as human interference in galactic affairs. Others would be grateful. But gratitude did not always translate to protection. The Ranger and its crew might need to watch their backs for a long time. Morrison accepted this. He had not joined the Space Forces to make friends or build a political career. He had joined to protect people. If that meant making enemies, so be it. As the conversation ended, Morrison received an unexpected message. It was from Earth, from Fleet Admiral Nathan Brooks, the highest-ranking officer in the United Human Space Forces. Brooks had been monitoring the situation. He was bringing a battle group to their location. The humans were not going to leave one of their ships hanging in the wind while the Coalition sorted out its political problems. Morrison felt relief wash over him. Backup was coming. But more than that, Earth's leadership was making a statement. Humans protected their own, and they protected those who could not protect themselves. The galaxy was about to learn what that really meant. On the Ranger's bridge, Hayes reported that all 3 Kresh warships were disabled. Cole's targeting had been perfect. Not one Kresh ship retained weapons or engine capability. Morrison nodded. He opened a channel to Foster. Status report. Foster's response came through clearly. All prisoners secured. Kresh guards neutralized. The Velix crew was shaken but alive. They were ready for extraction. Morrison allowed himself a small smile. He gave orders to prepare the ship to receive refugees. Medical teams were to treat any injuries. The galley was to prepare food suitable for Velix biology, and someone needed to contact the Coalition and inform them that the humans had just started a diplomatic incident, but he would deal with the consequences later. Right now, 42 people were alive because his crew had refused to ignore a cry for help. That was all that mattered. Commander Lisa Hayes stepped up beside him. She spoke quietly, reminding him of the consequences. They could be disciplined. Their careers could be ended. Earth's reputation in the Galactic Coalition could be damaged. Morrison looked at her. His voice was calm but absolutely certain. They had 14 hours to reach those people. Every minute they delayed was another minute those Velix crew members spent in terror. If he had to end his career to save them, that was a price he would pay gladly. Hayes smiled. She had served with Morrison long enough to know he would say exactly that. It was why she had requested assignment to his ship. She turned to the crew and began issuing orders. Battle stations, weapons check. Medical bay prepare for casualties. They were going into a fight against 3 warships with a single patrol vessel. The Ranger turned toward the distant coordinates and accelerated into the darkness. Behind them, Earth continued its slow rotation. Unaware that one of its suns was about to show the galaxy exactly what humans did when they heard someone crying for help. 14 hours to arrival. The clock was ticking.